Hi everyone, my name is Adrian Bonilla Flores, and today I'm going to be showing how Spain's role in the Colombian exchange reshaped its food culture, meaning which New World foods arrived, how geography and climate shaped the adoption of the foods, and how many iconic Spanish dishes actually trace their ingredients to that exchange. So why Spain? Well, I wanted to talk about Spain because it has a very interesting part in the Columbian exchange, and back in 1492, it actually served as the jumping point for Christopher Columbus, meaning that due to its position being by the Mediterranean Sea and the Atlantic Ocean, Christopher Columbus set sail into the New World, and I also had and it being the first point of encounter in the Atlantic Ocean, it allowed foods to travel through the rest of Europe over here as well. And Spain itself had some very interesting food transformations as well. So it became the primary conduit for New World crops into Europe. So let me talk about a little bit of the historical background before we talk about the main foods. After Columbus's voyage in 1492, there was a rapid expansion of Spanish colonial control in the 16th century, and because of that, there was a two-way movement of species, people, and knowledge, and even sicknesses. So as you can see right here, the Columbian Exchange, we got the arrow pointing to Europe, and this is everything they brought. It's tomatoes, maize, cacao, even turkeys. And what the New World got in exchange was cows and bananas and other kinds of fruits. It was a continuous transfer. Unfortunately, it also brought some diseases that I will not be getting into much in this topic presentation. All right, so let's talk about the geography and the climate. It's a very diverse geography. It has coastal plains, interior plateaus, and even mountain microclimates, all of which affected where the New World crops would be adopted. Because of this, before the Columbian Exchange, favorite foods would be olives and grapes. This is a picture of a vineyard over here, which, as we all know, wine comes from grapes, and wheat, all staples of the Old World Mediterranean diet. The arrival of New World crops didn't replace these immediately, but they did expand agricultural possibilities. For instance, potatoes and maize could be grown in regions and seasons where wheat was less productive, therefore increasing food security. All right, now that we talked about the history and the geography, let's talk about the New World and, more importantly, its foods. Um, Again, there were a lot of new foods being introduced, and that would change not just the diets of Spaniards and Europeans, but also their economies and their societies. Okay, so to start things off with, I'm going to be talking about the foods and the societal and economical impact that they had on the old world. So to kick things off, I'm going to be talking about tomatoes, which were obviously native to the Americas. They were introduced to Europe in the 16th century and eventually heavily incorporated into Spanish cooking. Like we all love tomato-based sauces. There's sofrito and red gazpacho, which is like also another type of sauce. Early evidence shows that 16th century specimens show tomato circulation across Europe, meaning that that's where it started, and there wasn't any tomatoes beforehand. So it's a good point as to how tomatoes came into Europe after the Columbian Exchange. So sofrito and tomatoes. Tomato became very central to the base flavors used across Spain, and not just Spain. I mean, we all have had pizza at some point, I'm sure. What is in pizza? It's a tomato sauce. It became very pivotal to Europe, Italy, Spain, and even France. But for the purpose of this, I'll just be limiting it to Spain. It was added to stews, sauces, and sofrito, which underpins many dishes. The modern red gazpacho, which is like a tomato-based cold soup, only really appears in diets after tomatoes reach Spain. Oh, and La Tomatina is not a food, but it's actually an event that I'm going to be talking about later on in the presentation, just as another example as to other ways that the foods coming into the old world affected modern culture. So now for a more interesting one, potatoes. They reached Spain in the late 1500s with records of potatoes sold in Sevilla markets by the 1570s. They were a very inexpensive and high yield staple that supported population growth in Europe. As we all know, potatoes are very easy to grow and very abundant and very easy to take care of. They basically take care of themselves. They were hearty, inexpensive dishes, and notably the tortilla de patatas, which is like a tomato omelet, shown here at the bottom picture, is a staple tapa across Spain nowadays too. Because of this, as it says here, peasant staples, they were very popular for the lower classes uh, due to how easy they were to grow and how inexpensive they were. Maize, or also known as corn, was mainly used as animal feed and had a lot of diverse uses all throughout the different regions of Spain as well. But for the most for the most part, they were, to my knowledge, they were used as animal feed. Uh, Onto peppers or pimenton, which is a type of smoked pepper. It became a signature spice in regions such as La Vera and were incorporated into preserved meats like chorizo. The specific regional PDO or protected designation of origin for pimenton de la Vera highlights local adaptation of the pepper. So what a protected designation of origin means is that only paprika produced in La Vera region of Spain, using its traditional drying and smoking methods, can legally use that name. Again, going back to chorizo, pimenton and chorizo are very popular together because of the flavor that it can give cured pork products like chorizo or even other meats. And it has a very Spanish flavor profile that is added to it. Another one of my favorites is the cacao bean. It's what we know as chocolate nowadays, and it arrived in the 16th century. And by the late 1500s, chocolate was actually a courtly beverage in Spain. Although, fun fact, it didn't start off as the hot chocolate that we know now, because when it was first going around, when it first started off, it was actually very bitter, as the cacao bean is. If you go into the grocery store and you get a chocolate bar that is more pure cacao, you're gonna notice that it has a little bit more of a bitter flavor. That's basically the same concept for the hot chocolate. It was eventually sweetened and adapted to European tastes. And then this later gave us popular Spanish cuisine. Well, it's popular in Spain, but also popular in other places, which are chocolate and the churros tradition. Very delicious. Okay, so we've been talking about these new crops going into the old world, but the old world already had pre-established societies. So what happens when you introduce new abundant crops into a society that has been running for plenty of time? Um, so one of the first things that happen is the new crops increased caloric yield and food security, like the potatoes. They're very dense in calories, and they raised agricultural productivity and helped fuel population growth and urbanization around the 18th and 19th centuries. Um, Spain also served as a hub because of these new crops. Again, going back to the previous slide, they're one of the first countries that you come into contact with if you're going through the Atlantic Ocean. And because of this, the foods would arrive in Spain and later be spread throughout Europe. But how about the dishes today? I briefly touched on some of these already, so I'm just gonna glimpse past them. The, but a lot of dishes nowadays, they have reflections of the Columbian exchange. So, for example, the tortilla española depends on the potatoes, but it's a very classic tapa in Spain. And as for the gazpacho, it's a kind of like a red tomato based recipe, but that's a little bit more of a modern recipe because, funnily enough, gazpacho uh, did exist before the Columbian exchange, but it was not with the tomato base. It had like a bread and oil soup, and it had deeper and older roots in Andalusia. It wasn't after the tomatoes were introduced that we get gazpacho with the red color and tomato flavoring. My personal favorite is the paella, which of course, same to the gazpacho. There's there's certain bases that predates the New World. For example, the rice that's in rice arrived with the Moors. But many modern paella ingredients, like tomato and even certain vegetables, reflect the later incorporations of the new crops. And paella, as we know, it took its shape in Valencian rice areas and evolved into its modern form in the 18th and 19th centuries. Again, churros and chocolate. It's they used to be better. And that's just cacao beans' natural flavor profile. It was later sweetened. And here's a very classic example of how the New World foods are used as more than just foods, and they're um, placed into a very interesting modern culture. So La Tomatina started off as a spontaneous food fight in 1945 in Buñol, Spain, but it really caught on, and now it's a global phenomenon involving tomatoes being thrown at thousands of others. And as you can see in the picture, everybody is just covered in red paste, tomato paste, which is what the tomatoes usually end up becoming. And it's very interesting. I've had a few friends go, and it's really just a good example of how tomatoes are used in events other than food. All right, so I think it's very interesting seeing how Spain's food culture slowly progressed with the introduction of these new world foods, and how the global processes such as exploration, colonization, and trade made their way into daily life. Um, Staples many Spaniards considered traditional arrived from the Americas back in the 16th century, but they just became so synonymous with Spain food culture that it's very hard to distinguish the two as being coming from separate places. Um, so yeah, the foods were adapted to local climates, tastes, and economies. I find it really interesting to see the population growth uh, and the effects that calorie-dense foods had in socioeconomic backgrounds. All right. Okay. And here are my sources. And thank you everybody for listening. Have a nice day.